So I wish to welcome the attendees and advising them that people is going to connect, and in a few minutes we shall start with the webinar. At the moment we have 150 people connecting one by one.
So it's 7 o'clock Paris time. We are going to start. On behalf of ICA and IDF, I'm welcoming you to this webinar on lameness in dairy cows, the challenging battle. We are really overwhelmed and happy about the big interest and response. Actually, we had over 700 registrations. We don't know how many really will connect today. At the moment, there are more than 250. Yeah, we hope that that for all it will be easy to follow and also to ask questions. We're not sure whether it will be very easy to answer all the questions, but we will try. The background of this webinar is that ICA and IDF are cooperating on animal welfare, actually. And I don't know whether all of you know ICA. ICA is the International Committee for Animal Recording, and we are working on harmonization and standardization of traits. And on behalf of ICA, the ICA Working Group on Functional Traits, where I'm having the honor of chairing this, we have the focus more on functional traits and one topic which you might know, where we have been working together with experts on clow health and lameness, is the ICA Clow Health Atlas. And this recent publication or a result of this collaboration are guidelines on lameness. And actually, this is the intention or the reason why we are organizing this webinar today, to present this and to give a background on lameness, to raise awareness for lameness, but also show examples and approaches how these guidelines can be used in practice. And lameness is one part or one important trait in animal welfare. And in the topic of animal welfare and animal-based parameters, we are working together with IDF. And actually, it's the second webinar in this cooperation. The first one was in general on animal-based welfare parameters. And we are really happy that we found very well known and experienced speakers. Sorry, Cesare?
Sorry. My fault.
Okay.
Sorry,
Was there
my
a
fault.
problem? Okay. For the program we have put together is that first there will be a presentation from Nicola Go. She's the communication manager from IDF on tools and practices to disseminate animal health. Then we will have a general introduction in lameness, a global dairy challenge from Professor John Huxley from Massey University. And then Anne-Marie Christen from Lameness will present the new guidelines for recording lameness in dairy cattle, which was elaborated with different experts from all over the world. And then Nick Bell will bring more the aspect on lameness scoring, improving consistency, accuracy, and managing expectation, and having also the focus more on practical implementation. And then we want to take time for discussions and questions. Just to introduce our speakers, the first talk will be by Nicola Go. She is the communication manager from the International Dairy Federation, and she is also responsible for communication for the Disarm project. The next speaker you probably know is Professor John Huxley from Massey University. He is the head of the veterinary school there. He moved 2 years ago to New Zealand. He is originally from the UK, and a very well-known researcher, and having also managing the link from research, but also being excellent researcher, but bringing also high impact solutions for down to the farm. And our next speaker is Anne-Marie Christen from Lameness. She's project manager there and has for several years worked on different projects on claw health. And Anne-Marie is working together with us for our working group on claw health since several years. And she was actually the one coordinating the work on harmonization of the lameness recording. And we're looking forward for her presentation. And last but not least, our next last speaker is Dr. Nick Bell from the UK. He is a honorary associate professor at the Nottingham University and director of the Herd Health and Welfare Consultancy organization. And he is also a member of various committees. And Nick was also involved in our expert group, or we are working together within ICA on this claw health guidelines and also on this lameness guidelines. And I think I'm looking forward for all those presentations, and I think they will be very interesting. Just a few organizational aspects. We have, when you ask questions, please use questions and answers, not the chat. We will, after each talk, we might have 1 to 2 questions. and then we will have more the common discussion later. And the next thing is that we would like to get an overview who is, or an ideal actually, who is participating. And Cesare will launch 3 questions here. And when they pop up at your screen, then please fill it out. And then about a minute later, we will look at the results. Cesare, please, could you show the survey? So we have here 3 questions, actually 4, and here you can scroll down. Please fill out which group of stakeholder do you represent. We would like to see a bit an overview who is participating tonight. And then the next question is whether you use lameness scoring scheme by yourself, and if yes, for which purpose you use it. And the last question is, do you think that harmonization of lameness scoring is important and beneficial? Don't know whether you need more time or you could answer already. I think, Cesare, are you?
They are still voting, Krista.
Okay.
Okay, maybe the first 170. On top of the screen, you can see how people voted, Krista. 190 out of 333.
Okay, yeah, but 60. I think I think we continue. There we have a question.
Yeah, okay. Maybe now. Okay, not yet. Okay, I'm going to close the polling.
Okay.
Okay, just a few seconds. Okay, 3, 2, 1. I close.
Okay.
And I'm going to share the results, Krista.
Okay. So if you can see it, you have to click on polls, then you can see the results. Can everyone see the results? Okay, so we have a quite good distribution, or so different groups actually there. There was in the chat that we did not indicate animal welfare specialists, so that we missed this group, and I think we need to write down that next time we have also this group. Goes to 7. Okay. Then do you use lameness scoring scheme? So 3/3 of the participants are using it, or those who participated in the survey. So it's herd management and welfare assessment, a bit more welfare assessment. And an overwhelming confirmation that harmonization is important. So actually, this is a confirmation of the work and intention of the cooperation work we are doing. Okay, so then I think we can continue to our first talk, and I would like to give the floor to Nicola, please. Nicola, can you share your screen? You are still, we cannot hear you.
You are muted.
You are muted.
Not a good start,
Okay.
is it?
Yeah, okay. And please share your screen.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that. So hi everyone, and on behalf of the International Dairy Federation, thank you for joining this joint webinar with ICAR today. Before we start the presentations, I'll just take 5 minutes of your time just to introduce the Disarm project, of which IDF is a partner. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Disarm, it's a thematic network under the Horizon 2020 Research and Innovation Programme of the EU. It's a collaboration between farmers, veterinarians, advisory services, academics and industry, which focuses on sharing innovative solutions in the livestock industry to reduce antibiotic use and consequently reduce and prevent antimicrobial resistance. So the project aims to deliver on a number of aspects. So the aim is really to bring everyone together to promote best practices in livestock farming, which can reduce the need for antibiotic use by focusing on things like biosecurity, breeding for resilience and animal health, alternative treatment options, and targeted use of antibiotics. The project aims to share information across farming sectors, species, and countries. This includes events and workshops to raise awareness, to connect livestock farmers, farm advisors and the veterinary community with those who've adopted innovative strategies to reducing antibiotic resistance. The project also aims to provide information and resources on best practice, management strategies and new technologies to ultimately reduce antibiotic resistance. And this includes the development of practical farm health plans based on input from farmers, advisors and veterinarians involved at the farm level. The project also brings together further research and innovation work on reducing antibiotic resistance on farms, and promotional work as well through the development of platforms, programs and events, both unique Disarm events and also opportunities like this to try and share it to the wider community. So as you can see from on screen, just to give a bit of information about how the project is organised. So it's led by a number of livestock organisations across Europe, IDF being one. This partnership allows for the development of a community of people with an interest in reducing antibiotic resistance in livestock farming. The way that it works is members share ideas, innovative solutions, review practices and problems, and learn from the experiences and knowledge of others. The resources, that there is a Disarm website as well, and the resources are available in a range of languages to try and maximise sharing, and there's also a newsletter that's published in multiple languages as well. So the aim of the presentation today is really to try and get people involved in the project. So there's a number of ways to get involved in Disarm. You can join the Disarm community of practice on Facebook to discuss and exchange ideas. It's very interactive. We want people to get involved, to develop, to share effective practical solutions to combat antibiotic resistance. You can also register on the website to receive Disarm's latest news and attend or participate in upcoming events and workshops to learn from those who've already successfully reduced antibiotic usage. You can access information on strategies to reduce antibiotic resistance on the resource pages on the website. The resource pages are very well populated. New information is being added all the time. So I really would recommend taking a look on there on a regular basis. And we would like to ask if you're a farmer who'd like to be involved in the development of a farm health plan or to host an event or workshop, please do get in touch via the Disarm website or by contacting me. We appreciate that times are quite difficult right now, but we're more than happy to try and help set up virtual events if that's at all possible. And that's it really. So to close, there is a wealth of information on the Disarm Project website. We invite you to take a look. It's the web address that's on screen at the moment. The project's also on social media, so we encourage you to follow and to share with anyone who might find these resources useful. So that's a very short start, 5 minutes, I think, Krista. and that's it.
Okay. Nicola, thank you very much for presenting Disarm. I think it's very important to cooperate with projects who have a very strong focus on dissemination and also putting best practices into practice. And I think therefore it's really good to have this presentation. There is is there a question? Not really, I don't know. Okay, if there is no question, I think, then I say thank you very much, Nicola, for your presentation, and also to IDF for cooperation, to Maria and the whole team. I think it's really good to work together on such important topics. Okay, then I would like to ask John to give his talk about lameness, global dairy challenge. John, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou. Welcome from a rather stormy New Zealand morning. I apologise if you hear the rain behind me, but it has just started absolutely hurling it down, as it tends to do in New Zealand. So welcome, and I'd like to thank the organisers, ICAR, IDF, for the invitation to speak to you this morning, this evening, wherever you are in the world. I guess I've just looked through the participants list, and I am going to feel a bit of a fraud speaking to such an expert audience, but I hope you'll forgive me. I've been given the brief just to really review where we are with lameness and just touch on some of the challenges that we face at a global level. And I guess the first thing I would like to remind us all is this is a global problem. It doesn't matter what system, what scale, what size, where you are in the world, lameness is reported as a problem. So the intensive systems, the extensive systems, the large herds, the small herds, we all are reporting lameness as a problem. And if we look at the sorts of levels we're talking about, they're reasonably significant. I'm going to focus on prevalence today because that's the metric and the method that we're talking about measuring lameness, and it's certainly the one that everybody has adopted. And if we look at average herd level prevalences, the last sort of 10, 15 years of research from around the world would suggest these sorts of levels. So the more extensive systems will report herd level prevalences of between 5 and 15%, that sort of level. And the more intensive systems will report herd level prevalences of 15 to 30% as an average herd level. And of course, I'm sure Nick will mention it later on. One of the great learnings we've had is that the variation between farms is huge. So in all the systems, the variation tends to range from close to zero to actually, in particularly some of the more intensive systems, very often above 60, 70% on some herds, giving us those sorts of averages. The other thing we know is that lameness is under-identified. Farmers and for a long time, many researchers, and I would include myself in that, we were under-identifying the levels of lameness we had on farm. And I think it's important to remember that if we go back to the variation between the systems, the extensive systems, and of course in New Zealand and my local experience is one of those, would very often feel that this isn't their problem. But I think we need to accept that if you try and convince a consumer that 1 in 10 or even 1 in 20 cows is lame, that still isn't acceptable. So we need to accept this absolutely is a global problem. And it has some profound impacts. If you look at the sorts of the impacts that we're seeing from lameness around the world, and again, this is now based on probably nearly 20 years of research that has started looking at this, it appears that lameness will cost us about 350 litres per case in terms of milk yield. And there's a number of factors which will lead to greater losses. So when the case occurs, so earlier in lactation will lead to greater losses. So a case of lameness earlier in lactation leads to greater losses. Severity, a more severe case will increase loss. And duration, again, the longer an animal is lame, the more milk she will lose. And I don't think, if you think about it, any of those things should surprise us very much. So it is impacting on yield. But again, I think it's always important we remember this. This graph has sort of been reproduced in a number of pieces of research from around the world. This is our representation of it, simply because I've got the data. This is 2 lactation curves reproduced from an entire lactation of cows, more than 1,000 cows, lameness scored every 2 weeks. And the 2 lactation curves represent cows which were never lame during that lactation versus the cows which were ever lame, so ever had a score lame during lactation. And what we see is that lameness is a disease of higher producing cows. So the ever lame cows which had a case of lameness, were higher producing. And so it's important we remember this, because we talk about lameness leading to lost milk production, but very often we don't see it. These cows start as the higher yielding cows in a herd, and so they're not identified on farm as low yielding cows, even though they have definitely lost milk. And then if we come to fertility of all the areas is probably the area that's been the best investigated. It really impacts. Lameness impacts on virtually every metric and every aspect of fertility that we can measure as researchers. And I've provided a list of all the areas that it's been demonstrated to impact just on the slide there, so that we know that lameness causes fertility problems. And again, on average, it appears to be at a global level, the sort of 10, 20, 30, even perhaps 40 days extension to the calving interval on average, 10, 20, 30 days. So it really is impacting on fertility. And we know it also increases the risk of culling, although this is the area that I think probably we most underestimate, not because it's not a real effect, but simply because if we look at the data that's recorded on farm, lameness very often isn't recorded as the reason for culling. It's the yield, or actually usually the fertility, which is recorded as the reason for culling. And so we probably underestimate the impact of lameness on culling, because it's one of the fundamentals which is underpinning the loss of yield and the low fertility, which is then leading to the culling. So those are the production losses. And if we move on to what we know and what we think we know about how it impacts cows from a well-being perspective, there's now a wealth of data from all over the world asking vets, producers and advisors and students and everybody else what level of their discomfort they think that cows are suffering with lameness. And most of the work has used this standard 10-point scale, where 1 is no pain at all and 10 is the worst pain imaginable. And most of the data would put lameness and the causes of lameness in this sort of range, the 5, 6, 7, 8 on that 10-point scale. So this is significant discomfort. If you think about the sorts of things that you would grade on your own pain scale at the sort of 5, 6, 7, and certainly 8 level, these are getting painful events, and that's what we judge lameness and some of the common causes of lameness to cause to the animals that we look after. So if we sum all that up, the impacts are profound. So again, I'm not going to go into the exact details of how much loss we are seeing when we try and calculate this, but this is many hundreds of dollars, euros, pounds, whatever your currency is. All of the data suggests this is hundreds or significant losses if you add up the culling, yield, fertility, and other problems that are associated with lameness. This is having big effects on the global dairy herd. And lastly, and I think the one that's really come through to the fore, certainly over the last 10 plus years, is when we put all that together, we need to accept this is a reputational challenge for the industry, because first of all, rightly so, this is a disease affecting a lot of animals and causing discomfort. And of course, the other challenge we have here is this is a disease that the public understand. You don't need to be an expert to understand lameness and to identify lameness in animals. You know, if we look at some of our other big challenges, perhaps let's pick mastitis as an example. I think the average member of the public would find mastitis much more challenging to understand and identify, whereas lameness is front and center, and the public understand it. And certainly we are seeing this coming to the fore as a challenge reputationally for the whole industry. And I think when I got into lameness, I think the thing that struck me was how far behind our understanding of lameness was compared to some of the other big endemic diseases. So again, if we ask producers around the world, they would tend to record mastitis, infertility, and lameness as their big three problems. There are other, depending on where you are in the world, there are others that make that top three. But those are the big three endemic diseases: mastitis, infertility, and lameness. And if we compare our understanding of disease control on farm and actually the underlying causes, we're a long way behind with lameness compared with these other two diseases. We could judge that by any metric in terms of the amount of research publications, the amount of research dollars, the control mechanisms on farm. We've always lagged behind with lameness. And we could talk about why that is. But actually, I think for me, one of the profound reasons is when we look at close to cow research, there hasn't been great pharmaceutical company interest in lameness, because compared with infertility and mastitis, the pharmaceutical companies who clearly underpin a lot of the research that takes place in these areas haven't had a mechanism to derive huge benefit. And so if we sum that up, I think in terms of the numbers of animals affected, we know it's large numbers. The degree of discomfort this disease is causing, the length of time that lameness will last for in cows, we know this is a chronic disease. If we add all those things together, we know we've got a big global problem in terms of an endemic disease. And then I think we should add one or two of the newer understandings that we have about lameness to add to why perhaps lameness has come to the fore over the last few years. Firstly, we now understand that for many of the causes of lameness, it's a vicious downward spiral. So disease begets disease. When an animal becomes lame for the first time, she's more likely to become lame again in the future. A little bit like our understanding of Staph aureus mastitis, for example. We know that once an animal has a case of Staph aureus mastitis, that makes her far more likely to have a case again in the future. And all of the latest research is demonstrating that is true of lameness. We've also seen work demonstrating that lameness probably upregulates the pain pathways. And of course, that's really important to us to remember. So an animal which becomes lame upregulates pain pathways, making her more likely to show lameness and to feel lameness more profoundly when she has the next case. And we've seen the impacts on industry reputation coming through, and this being identified as something that our consumer really does care about. And so I think that explains why, actually, if we look at what's happened over the last decade or more, we have suddenly seen some very significant advances, and we've seen much more investment in our understanding and control of this disease on farm. And you know, rightly so. I think it's great that sea change has occurred, and it has been a sea change. If you look at where lameness research was and lameness funding, lameness control on farm, sort of 15 plus years ago, the last 10 to 15 years have seen a profound change. And, you know, I can only speak from my own example. I've been extremely fortunate to now have a full decade of consistent funding of research into lameness. And I think that just identifies the importance that producers and other organizations are focusing on lameness. And I know, looking at who's in the room with us, I know some of you have also been the recipients of that sea change in the funding and control of lameness. I just wanted to very quickly, as I draw to an end, sort of identify for me what has been our big changes in understanding of control over the last decade or so. And I just wanted to highlight 4 or 5 things very quickly. I don't intend to dwell on them to any great extent. But I think the things that really have come through for me are these. First of all, early identification, prompt, effective treatment. Work from all over the world has been demonstrated. If we identify lameness early, treat it quickly and effectively, it decreases and profoundly decreases the impact the disease has on animals. And again, every time I say this, we shouldn't have to say this. You know, as a veterinarian, I say this and think, you know, is it any surprise to us that it's better to treat disease early and when it's mild rather than leave it to become chronic and severe? But the research has clearly demonstrated there's a real benefit in early identification, prompt, effective treatment. I think the second thing I would highlight is our understanding of the vicious downward spiral. I've mentioned it already, but I think it's important we highlight it again. All of the research that's coming out now is demonstrating that once an animal becomes lame, she is far more likely to have lameness again in the future. And that's really important for our understanding of control on farm, because it means that if we can intervene early and prevent first cases occurring, we can actually impact on the whole lifetime of that animal. And so the vicious downward spiral of disease is an important aspect for us to consider. Then I guess we get into perhaps some of the more controversial areas, but anybody who's heard me speak before will know that I'm certainly an advocate in this area. If we look at the etiopathogenesis, the causes of particularly clawhorn disease, not so much dermatitis in this regard, I think historically we would have thought about this as predominantly a metabolic disease with some mechanical components. But all of the research now is suggesting this is predominantly a mechanical disease with some metabolic components. We're seeing this shift in our understanding. So we're moving away from the idea that this is rumen acidosis and laminitis, much more to this being the impact of the environment and changes to the structures in the hoof. And our focus has been on these areas. We've focused much more on the calving effect. We know that calving has a profound impact on the whole body, including the foot. And actually, it appears that it's calving that's initiating some of the challenges that underpin clawhorn disease. We've seen a lot of focus on the digital cushion and the role of the digital cushion and how body condition score loss impacts on the digital cushion. And more recently, we're seeing increasingly that lameness, our understanding of why a case of lameness leads to a future case of lameness, it's because it alters those structures in the foot. So it alters the digital cushion and we see new bone forming on P3, both of those things leading to the next case of lameness, this downward spiral of disease. And lastly, I just wanted to highlight the role of non-steroidals. Again, looking at who's in the room, I know there's a number of us who've been working on non-steroidals over the last decade or more and trying to understand the role of non-steroidals in lameness control. But I wanted to very briefly highlight what I think is the best study that I've ever designed and completed. We have just completed a 3-year-long randomized treatment intervention study using non-steroidals. And non-steroidals, as the previous work have demonstrated, are having profound effects. So instead of one-off treatments with non-steroidals, in this study, what we did was we randomly allocated cows for life to a treatment group where they either received non-steroidal or didn't receive non-steroidal associated with lameness events over that 3-year period. So an animal could carve in and then get non-steroidal at every time she was identified lame and treated. And we are seeing profound effects. And I'm afraid it's too early. We're preparing that for submission right now. And I can't go into a lot more detail, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. But it really appears that non-steroidals can have profound effects as an intervention on farm if they're used at all cases. And so as I wrap up, I guess one of my big understandings of my more than a decade of lameness research has been that one of the things that we have lacked is consistently recorded high quality data. I started my career as a mastitis researcher. I see my former supervisor is in the audience. Hi, Andrew. And coming from a background of mastitis research, where we have huge quantities of good quality data, one of the things I learned from lameness was that really wasn't the case. And for those of us working on lameness, one of the first big problems we've always had is recording that high quality data. And we've had to go out and do that ourselves. And that's added huge amounts of cost to the research that we've been conducting. And so I'm delighted when I see initiatives like the ICAR IDF initiative that we're here to talk about tonight, because we're starting to see that consolidation and mechanisms for consistently recording the high quality data we need. And we know it makes a difference. We know that high quality farm level data, lameness data, leads to early identification and prompt effective treatment. We know that once we start measuring this, it starts getting identified and treated. We also know it drives on-farm action. There's a number of really nice studies which have demonstrated if all we do is implement routine monitoring and recording on farm, and if farms adopt that, suddenly it moves up their priority list for making change. And there's a number of studies which have demonstrated that good quality data drives on-farm action. It certainly drives our disease understanding. As I've talked about, one of the big problems we all had when we first started investigating this disease was that we didn't have the high quality data even as a benchmark. And it was some of the Scandinavian countries that really showed us the way in that regard, and the types of epidemiological data that we could get out of having consistently recorded high quality data at a national level. So thank you for Scandinavia for really driving us in that regard. And lastly, of course, genetic selection. If you talk to the geneticist, one of the big problems they always point at lameness is they say, well, give us the high quality phenotypic data on farm, and we know that we can start selecting for lines of cows which are less are more resistant to disease, because we know that we can select. It is heritable and we can select for some aspects. So as I say, I'm absolutely delighted to see the initiative launched by ICAR IDF. I think it's long overdue, and I'm sure it will become the next fundamental underpinning step in progressing our understanding of disease over the next decade or more. Thank you very much for your time, and I will hand back to our organizer. Thank you.
Okay, John, thank you very much for the really interesting and motivating talk, and also for, let's say, encouraging us in our work to see that that research really shows that there is benefit, and that there is important that we work on this harmonization. Before moving to the next talk, I think we could have one or two questions. There is one on how lameness affects ovarian cyclicity. Any mechanism?
Possibly there is another question related to the fertility, the link between lameness and fertility, made by Sofia Matalia. So there are two questions that are very similar, possibly.
Thank you, Cesar. Yeah, no, I see them both, and I think, you know, I didn't dwell on it, and I certainly didn't take the time because of time constraints today. But this is an area that we find really challenging, because we end up with this circular argument of high yield, fertility, lameness, loss of body condition, poor nutrition, and actually working out what is starting, it's chicken and egg, you know, where does this start? Is it the lameness that impacts on nutrition, which impacts on fertility, or is it the genetic lines of these cows which mean that they are infertile, become lame, but are high yielding? Yeah, it's a hugely challenging area, and honestly, I think we're going to really struggle to pick this out. But it does get me onto one of my favorite areas, which actually I start wondering whether there is a unifying theory here, because if you look at some of the latest data where we start looking at a transition, I wonder whether there is a unifying theory somewhere where, because we know we can identify animals even in transition which will fail in early lactation, And I just wonder whether there is something pulling all those three things together. If we get into the specifics of impact on ovarian function, again, there is some work, and I haven't got it. It's not my real area of strength, but we've certainly demonstrated that lameness is associated with changes to ovarian function. But you're right. The problem is that because these are high-yielding cows, and that's why they're having fertility problems, and then they subsequently become lame. It's a hugely challenging area. That's a very long-winded way of not really answering. Sorry.
Okay, John, thank you very much. We have quite some other very interesting questions, but I think we will keep them then for our general discussion. And John, thank you very much. And we will move to Anne-Marie Christen from Lactanet, and she will present the work we did together with the different experts on Glow Health, on recording lameness in dairy, or on guidelines for recording lameness in dairy cattle. And we are then really interested also to get feedback to that. Anne-Marie, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Krista. You hear me well?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everybody. So Dr. Oxley just presented an excellent presentation on the impact of lameness for the dairy industry. But as he stressed already in his presentation, if we want to improve the situation, we need to record numbers and information. So today I'm very pleased to be the representative of that group of experts who get together and decide to create these ICAR guidelines for recording lameness in dairy cattle. So the objective of my presentation today is to give you a quick overview of the content of these guidelines. I invite you all to download those guidelines because there is very interesting information, references, tables that will help you to start recording lameness on the farm and maybe for your industry. These guidelines can be found on the ICAR website under the heading Guidelines, the section 7 and extract number 5. The aim of these guidelines is to harmonize the trait definition and to standardize the data recording process. The guideline describes the common lameness scoring methods that are used in the world, and we have more specifically the recommended practices for an harmonized scheme. These recommendations can be used for different objectives, such as the herd claw health management, animal welfare assessment, benchmarking, or genetic evaluation, as Dr. Ashley just mentioned. Now let's see together the main recommended practices for scoring lameness. The system that is proposed by ICAR is a 5-point scale system, including information on the posture, the gait, and some behavioral criteria. How do we record lameness? It's on a flat, firm, and non-slippery surface, a surface that the cow are familiar to. The assessor should see the side view of the cows for a better evaluation of the posture and the gaits. The guidelines, for the one that are interested, also propose some specific step-by-step methods for recording lameness in freestall barns and as well as tie stall barns, because the way that we record the information is different. When do we record lameness? Ideally is right after milking, as it is more convenient with normal farm work, and it should be done on a very calm environment. The gait of the cow is generally improved after milking because the reduced size of the udder and the motivation of the cows to going back to their pen. How many animals should we assess? It's usually proportional to pen size or herd size. So in the guidelines, you will find information about how many numbers of cows, depending on the size of the herd. The guidelines also proposes information for large pasture-based herds, like that is existing in the country of Dr. Oxley in New Zealand and as well in Australia. How often should we look for lameness? Every 2 weeks to once a month, according to the farm objective. Every 2 weeks would be optimal because it's very important for early detecting of the new cases. But sometime on farm condition, human resources, and the time that is required to record lameness can reduce this frequency. The guidelines that we are proposing are very simple, so they can be used easily by dairy farmers, veterinarian, hoof trimmer, dairy advisor, as well as farm employee. But the most important factor is the training. Literature reports that training should be a combination of theoretical instruction and practical training. They recommended that the annual training is highly recommended because the more you score cows, the better you are at seeing the lame cows. It's a bit similar to body condition scoring. Without training, as people tend to get used to see lame cows in their environment, only the severely lame cow can be detected. Now I'm going to present you the table that summarizes all the criteria for each cow. So this table well describes the 5 different scores of lameness. For each score, there are 2 pictures, one showing a standing cow and the other a walking cow. And for each score, there is a description about the posture and the gait of the cow. And on the last column, some more criteria which can help to differentiate between 2 scores, like the movement of the head, if the joints are stiff, and the reluctance of bearing weights. Sometimes this information can be useful to differentiate which score you are looking at. Here is the information for score 1, 2, and 3, and in the guidelines you will also find the information for score 4 and 5. This proposal is not new information, but a combination of existing information. First, the pressure system 125 that is widely used and easily applied under farm condition. Then the picture from Zimpro that show the reluctance of bearing weight on the affected limb. The picture also put an emphasis on the back line of the cow, which can help to detect problems. And the written description and criteria are from the Code of Practices for the Care and Handling of Dairy Cattle that is used in Canada. Now that we have a system in place, how can we use the lameness data? Certainly for herd management. It helps dairy farmers and the advisor to early detect the claw problems. Early detection will prevent the escalation of repeated events and will surely avoid chronic cases. But if we want to improve and monitor the lameness at the herd level, the information should be recorded in the herd management software of the farm, or at least on a paper recording sheet for future consideration. Another way that we are now seeing more and more on farm is mobile application for recording lameness, which can be fast and very useful. If the information is stored in a central data bank, then we have more possibilities to widely use the information and the data. We can think of benchmarking for improving the health of the herd. And also like the welfare. This disease, it's a visible disease. So it's very important on a consumer point of view, because they are very concerned the way we are the way we are doing milk production. So they have an eye on this. So this is why lameness scoring is commonly used in welfare assessment. Lameness information can also be used for improving the health of the herd through genetic selection. Feet and leg condition can be improved by breedings, and there is a correlation between lameness and claw health traits. So genetics is one of the tools that the farmers can use to improve the feet and leg condition and lameness in their herd. So that was quickly the information that you will find in the document. It also contains more detailed information like the risk factor, useful reference about the practices just presented, example of other systems used for scoring lameness like the mobility scoring, and more detailed information about the use of this the data. So I take this opportunity to thank the expert who work on the guidelines and for the excellent cooperation. This group also produced in 2015 the Claw Health Atlas that can be found also on the ICAR website under the publication heading. And just for your information, this atlas has been already translated into 21 different languages. Thank you for your attention.
Anne-Marie, thank you very much for your interesting presentation, and especially also for all your work you put into this joint work with us. And I also want to thank all the experts who have contributed and committed to this work. We are a little bit over time. I've seen there is one question, but which probably needs a bit more time to answer. And I guess this is something because there is a question concerning the recording scheme of Sprecher. I have the feeling that we should keep it for the discussion afterwards when we discuss on this. Cesare, do you see a very fast question to answer?
No, but we will do our best to put a document on the website together with the video and the presentations. This document will contain the questions and the answer that the panelists are going to provide after the meeting. So please, as soon as you receive this, my email regarding the availability of videos and PowerPoint, that page will contain also these document.
Okay.
Because it's difficult to concentrate different questions into single one.
And we can probably send along the link to get the document.
Yes. Yeah. So if you, Anne-Marie, if you don't mind, then we keep this question, for the discussion afterwards there on this relation with high production and lameness, that this is caused more by mechanical disorders than by metabolic disorders. That we keep this
maybe just one information for Mr. João Canas da Silva. The ICAR suggests you to browse the ICAR guidelines that are freely available on the ICAR website, icar.org. So you can browse that and get the link to the document for the classification of lameness.
Okay, thank you, Cesare. Then Nick, please, if we can ask you for your presentation.
Can you see that okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, well, thank you. Hello to everyone who's on the line tonight, and a big thank you to ICAR and IDF for the invitation to speak on this subject. It's become the major theme of my veterinary career, thanks to a very special opportunity I had 18 years ago to embark on a PhD at Bristol University with some very good colleagues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work and experience I've had with using mobility scoring, or lameness scoring, as we're going to be referring to it tonight, in the field. And I'm going to really major on the topic of trying to improve consistency, and John's already touched on that topic, trying to understand what we mean by accuracy. And I'm going to explain why I think we need to move away from being very focused on some of the traditional lesions causing lameness that are probably more end-stage type lesions. And in the process of doing all of that, how we manage everyone's expectations so that we are not dealing with end-stage disease, but dealing with the early onset of lameness. So just as a sort of an overview of the topics I want to cover in the next 20 minutes, lameness scoring makes an extremely valuable metric. We deal with numbers, measures of foot health, of mastitis, of fertility, of general herd health. And if we want to manage a condition such as lameness, then we really do need to have some robust metrics in order to establish where we are currently when we're working with a farm and where we want to be. I also want to talk about the fact that lameness scoring, while you can teach yourself to some degree, that if you want to have standardization, that means you've got a comparable metric between farms and over time, then you need to do some degree of standardization, and that can't be a self-taught exercise. So you have to do some form of training in order to make sure that you as an observer don't inadvertently drift in the way that you're scoring, and that what you are measuring is comparable to others. And as I mentioned just now, that most classic lesions, in my opinion and the opinion of quite a number of others now working in this field, are advanced end stage type of disease, and we really need to try and tackle that. And as I say, we need to manage these expectations carefully. So that's a brief overview of what I want to talk about. So John mentioned a little bit earlier that we do see this discrepancy between what the farmer perceives as lame and what the independent observer, particularly the researcher, and I've worked as a researcher in this field now for 18 years, and we see this consistently, and hopefully less than we used to, but it is still a major challenge for us working with farmers anywhere in the world, and that's not meant to mean as a criticism of farmers. So here we've got a scatter graph showing on the y-axis the prevalence of cattle in herds as measured by researchers, and along the x-axis the prevalence as reported by the farmer or estimated by the farmer in most instances. And what you see is that actually the perfect correlation would be along the blue dotted line, and quite clearly what we see here is most of the farmer estimates are somewhere between 0 and 10%, whereas the researcher estimates are ranging from 80% down to close to 0. So some major discrepancies there between researchers and the farmer. Now, you could quite rightly get into a debate about who is right in these instances, and of course what we're talking about is an assessment of lameness levels, and we've really highlighted that the term lameness can mean such a different thing to different people. So there is a real advantage to placing a score to demonstrate that we're dealing with a spectrum and to place the cow in the correct spot along her spectrum of lameness behavior. So my interest in this subject was really stimulated as part of my PhD study, and I was visiting 60 farms and evaluating lameness in great detail on those 50 farms. And one of the key conclusions of that work, one of the biggest predictors of the prevalence of severe lameness, was how well the farm implemented early detection prompt effective treatment. Now there was an intervention component part of this study, but this was probably the most important finding from my perspective as a lameness researcher, and then, as I say, became a bit of a major theme for us working on the subject of lameness in the UK. We built on that with initially a case study where we looked at, and here we've got a graph from that case study where we thought, well, let's apply the concepts of early detection prompt effective treatment, or EDPET as we would abbreviate it, to a farm, a high prevalence farm, 70% of cows lame. And using those principles, we could take that farm from 70% lameness levels, terribly high, down to 15 or 16% over the course of just over a year, which was probably our initial bit of confirmation that this was probably a good theme to work on. We followed that up with a randomized control trial where we allocated cows to a treatment and control group, and again demonstrated we were able to reduce the prevalence of lameness significantly in that way. But we also demonstrated that chronic lameness is a real issue, and that in most commercial dairy herds there is a delay to treatment, which might be for practical reasons, it might be for awareness reasons. And then John mentioned the work that was then followed up with a couple of randomized control trials at Nottingham University that really helped us understand more about the effective treatment element of that equation. So to summarize, there is a growing body of evidence to show the importance of early detection, prompt effective treatment to the overall management and reduction of lameness in dairy herds. Of course, there is no room for guesswork in the dairy industry, and I really believe that passionately as an advisor, as someone working as an advisor in the field, and particularly as a researcher. We need to have some robust measures, and we can use those robust measures for benchmarking purposes, and we could use prevalence, and we can also benchmark severity, and in those instances perhaps every 3 to 12 months it is a useful interval for assessing lameness. But if we want to use get a better understanding of trends at a farm level, then perhaps more in the way of monthly monitoring of lameness using mobility scores is more useful. But if we really want to use lameness scoring as a screening tool, then we really need to be looking at every 1 to 2 week intervals in our scoring. And this is when actually the use of scoring systems can become hugely powerful, because it does have enormous potential and utility as a screening tool, particularly in the large herds where there may be people who are less tuned to lameness working with cows in the parlour. So in those instances, having someone dedicated to screening cows can be very useful and powerful. And then of course, through this process, we then generate some useful data that we can then start to tease out things like cure rates, which might be 4 to 6, well, we would say 5-week cure rates can then generate some useful additional information to hone some of the treatment protocols that we might be applying on dairy farms. So all of this data can be enormously useful. And here's a farm, some data from a farm that I work with. It's 1,000 cows, and we would do a formal lameness score every month. And then as a weekly exercise, the herd manager would watch every cow from every group as a screening exercise, so that we get the combination of data that we can use at the herd level on a monthly basis, and some screening data that we've got from the cows at individual cow level on a weekly basis. And we can use this data and analyze it in a whole host of ways using software that we've got available, in order to categorize cows as in various different ways, as chronic, new cases, recovered cases, or remaining sound. And I think this is an area of growing interest and development, and as software develops in the future, we'll see better insights being gained from the use of this type of data. But all of this really does hinge on having good quality, robust data. And we can really work on the consistency of this. But I just want to pose the question now, is this cow lame? I'm going to show you a video, and I would just like you as the audience to have a look and make a decision. So I'm only going to show her to you once. And now, Cesare, if you are able to open the polling and just ask people if they would like to vote, do you think she is lame? Yes or no? I'd just like to see what your thoughts are. I've shown her briefly once, and hopefully that was enough of a glimpse. If you're scoring 1,000 cows, and I would score about, personally, I would score about 20,000 cows a year, and I would analyze the data from about 100,000 cows. And in my efforts at scoring some of the large herds, that's probably about as much time as you're going to get to evaluate a cow. So you do have to get confident at seeing these cows. So Cesare, if we're able to close the voting and see what people thought of that cow. So okay, and that is absolutely what I was expecting, that we were going to get some split opinion there as to whether she was lame or not. So this is where I think the concept of scoring, training and standardization really need careful consideration. So let me, hopefully this is going. And standardization, I warn people that to any sort of lameness scoring, observation of cow behaviors have a high degree of subjectivity, but so does perception of color. And we would mostly agree that the circle on the left is blue and the circle on the right is red. There may be some differences in our color perception, but generally with a little bit of training as a child, we quickly learn our colors. And in the same way, we learn to recognize cow behaviors. And what's really important to recognize is there are a number of different behaviors. Back arch and the way the cow places her leg and flexes her joints are some really important predictive signs that we know from some of the published literature, but it's the combination of signs, the overall locomotion score or lameness score, that is most predictive. So if we look at this cow again and we start looking at her repeatedly, there are a few things that we will observe. That she's actually walking with a relatively flat back and good head carriage. She's having a good look at us as she walks by. So at first impression is that she's walking fairly well, and there seems to be a reasonably even rhythm in her weight bearing. But actually you start to look more closely and the back right swings through more quickly, and the back left looks stiffer because there's not as much flexion in her fetlock joint. So what we notice is the dew claws don't descend to the ground as much in the back left as in the back right. And this is a really clear indication that there's a problem going on in the back left. And we can use videos as part of the training exercise to highlight some of these behaviors and to identify that actually she is tracking up pretty well. The tracking up is where the back foot lands where the front foot left off. So that's not an issue, but she is placing a back left slightly narrow and one footstep and slightly wide in another. And that's because she's got a fairly significant lesion causing lameness in her back left. And the use of these videos and then picking up cows' feet to help people build the confidence that these cows do have lesions causing lameness is part of the whole training exercise. So I would argue that the standardization requires a few key things to be considered. So training is an essential thing. You can do a certain amount of self-training, but in order to get true standardization, you have to understand how others are perceiving those behaviors. And video footage really helps direct you towards the important signs, the important behaviors that are predictive of the lesions causing lameness. And then, of course, you need to practice, and there's some indication that probably something in the order of 500 cows are required in order to get some level of reasonable consistency in identifying those behaviors and build that confidence. But at least 200 to 300 is probably fine in the initial training. And then lifting the feet to help people really build that confidence that there are lesions there. And then you can go on to start doing some degree of performance benchmarking, and that could be in the form of quantifying sensitivity, specificity, accuracy, and positive predictive value with the level of scoring and sensitivity that you're applying to your scoring. And then to guard against observer drift, then some sort of regular, and it could be annual recheck, could be extremely useful. And the reason I think this is really important to get right is because when we look at different experts, researchers in the field, and we get them to do a scoring exercise using video clips, then if we haven't got some degree of standardization, then we're going to experience some variability, and that's to be expected. That's just part and parcel of the variability in which we perceive the behaviors causing lameness. And I've just picked some data. This is some data that we've submitted for publication. We took some people who've published in the field lameness, and we asked them to observe some videos. And thank you very much to all of those for participating in this, and thank you to ICE Robotics for facilitating some of this work. And we've got so we scored over 200 cow clips in this exercise, and one expert was down as low as 36.8% prevalence, and another one as high as 58%. So we've got some variability in the prevalence estimates that would translate to some issues if we're not careful. Of course, we didn't do any standardization ahead of this work. And I mentioned we can look at various performance metrics when we're looking at how we are scoring. There are some things metrics that we talk about quite frequently. We talk about the sensitivity, and just to remind you briefly, sensitivity is looking at the true positive rate. So if we're looking at all the cows that are lame, what proportion of them have we correctly identified? And in this example, then 4 out of 6 cows that might be picked out at lameness scoring. If we've missed 2, then our sensitivity is going to be 4 out of 6. If we're looking at specificity, then we're looking at the true negative rate. But from the farmer perspective, it's probably the positive predictive value that the farmer's really focused on. And the positive predictive value is of the cows that the scorer has found as lame, or the system has found as lame, what proportion of those look to have lesions causing lameness. And of course, from the farmer perspective, they'll be looking for the classic lesions, the sole ulcers, the white lines, the toe necrosis, the things that are quite obvious to most farmers. And of course, if the farmer picks up a foot and cannot see anything other than a mild bit of sole hemorrhage, then they're liable to think that there's a problem with the scorer. And this is something that we've really encountered. And sometimes the passions can be really high in this respect. Just to remind you, the last metric is overall accuracy, and that's the combination of true positive over true negative over all the cows that are scored. So the farmers expect lesions like this, the sole ulcers, the white lines, and when we look through farmer records, these are the things that predominate. What we don't see is the sole hemorrhage to a large degree. And my argument, my hypothesis is actually many of the clawhorn lesions start in some ways as sole hemorrhage, or as we'd often describe it, sole bruising. And some of that could be explained by the delay that we observe between the onset of the lameness signs and when we see a recorded treatment. And in one study, we performed this analysis, and we found the delay between when we first saw behavioural signs of lameness to when we saw a recorded treatment, the median time was 65 days. And these were in fairly well managed, fairly typical dairy herds. Some instances there was no delay. In fact, half the cows were treated at around the same time. But 40% of cows, the delay was 2 weeks. 30% of the cows, the delay was 4 weeks. And the work that we've done at Nottingham University would show that a delay of 2 weeks can mean the difference between a cure rate of potentially 85% down to a cure rate of 15%. And so the early detection really has probably one of the biggest, most profound impacts on cure rates overall.
Okay. Nick, may you please consider the time? Okay. Sorry.
A little bit of a late start, so my apologies for having to race through this. So we coming towards the end, but really in managing expectations, sole hemorrhage, sole bruising really has to be the one of the things we raise awareness to, and we need to really help our farmers by training them on detecting the early signs, the early lesions causing lameness, using all the tools in our armory. So in summary, we have lameness scoring, which is such a valuable tool, such a valuable metric, and we have to help farmers raise their expectation that lameness percentages are going to be higher than they are expecting, and that standardization can't be a self-taught exercise. We can do a certain amount of self-training, but in order to get some reasonable comparable data, we need to do some work together in groups and gain some consistency that way. And in order to ensure that we're gaining the accuracy, we really have to build the confidence in the early detection and the milder lesions, because this is where lameness is starting. Most of the time we're dealing with the chronic, severe end-stage lesions. And then finally, in doing all of this, we really have to put a lot of emphasis on how we manage people's expectation by working with the team, so that they know that they're building confidence in the data, because the subjectivity of lameness scoring can mean fingers get pointed in all sorts of directions. So with that, I'd like to say thank you again for the invitation to speak tonight. I think that's my 20 minutes up. Of course, welcome all the questions, and I'm happy to answer them afterwards if we've run out of time. So thank you very much, and back to your.
Okay. Nick, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation. There now, I think we have about 10 minutes for general discussions and questions. So I think, is there directly a question for Nick? Or
there is a question for Nick about scoring 500 cows. How much time will it take? Every 2 weeks is recommended?
So the fastest herd that I score on, they are milking at around about 370 cows an hour, and 370, 380. So those cows are coming out quickly. Thankfully, they're not a high prevalence herd, because I think I would be struggling if they were a high. So they're doing a great job, and they're around about 7 or 8% lameness prevalence. There are other herds that are milking at around, so I'm always scoring out of the parlour as cows are being milked. There'll be other herds that will be much slower. So 500 cows being milked at 200 cows an hour, you could be done in 2.5 hours. So the managers that are doing this scoring, I'd be asking them to do a different group each day so they don't get overwhelmed, and watch every cow at least once a week.
There is a question from Peter Rondell, very tightly connected with this one. He's asking about the automatic scoring system. Do they exist? Are there a few commercial available systems that can be used?
Yeah, so this is a really exciting area of research at the moment. And I think the work done by various researchers all around the world show that the technology can find these cows. There's a little bit of debate about whether humans can outperform the technology, but I think what the technology does is it looks every day, and yeah, it's that intensity of searching for the cows that's so good. There is no perfect system out there. Even human scorers are imperfect, and perhaps sometimes our expectation is that we want to find something that matches up with the best human scorer that we've got. And of course, all the automatic systems will have their strengths and weaknesses. But I've done a little bit of work with Cow Alert. I've done a little bit of work with some of the other systems out there, camera-based systems. There's a load cell system, and they all pick out cows to some degree. And I think the role of automatic lameness detection in the future will be hugely exciting and important.
Thank you.
Thank you. There is another. Sorry.
There is another question, possibly for John, regarding the stress, since Frank van Erdenburg suggests that the lameness is mediated by stress. So reducing the stress could be reduce also the activity of neurons in the hypothalamus, he suggests. So maybe John can provide a reply to this question.
Yeah, thank you. And I've been furiously answering questions in the chat as well as we've gone along. So,
okay, sorry.
it's of course right, but this gets us back into what is one of the most challenging aspects of lameness research, is we get back into these ever decreasing circles of, is it genetic and it's high yielding, and these animals, is it genetic and these animals are now predisposed to very high yields, which of course put them under stress depending on the environment, and we just get into these circular arguments of as where is all of this coming from and what's starting it off. And I think that's what takes me back to this idea that there is a unifying theory somewhere, which I think we can pull a lot of our endemic diseases together into, and I don't know what it is. I've started mulling it quite a bit now in the last few years, but it's a really complicated area. But of course, you're right. We know that those impacts on fertility are going to almost certainly be mediated via the hormonal impacts. But of course, whether it's stress, milk yield, genetics, poor quality nutrition, lameness, it's just very difficult to get a starting point.
I see that most of the questions have been answered.
Yeah, there are still.
So I'm fine. I'm trying to find.
There is one from Peter Rondel again. DD is considered as with low correlation to lameness. Is that because the lameness scoring skills are too poor? Can we improve our DD detection in acute cases by being better at lameness scoring?
Got me to chip in on that one. It's yeah. So we pick up digital dermatitis on our mobility scoring, and certainly when you tighten up the digital dermatitis control, is probably the thing that makes the biggest impact to our lameness scores in a short space of time. Most of the claw lesions are fairly sort of chronic term lesions, but the thing that you can make a big impact on is with your digital dermatitis control. So I think you can pick them up with lameness scoring, and yeah, of course there are cows with lesions that don't appear on your lameness scores, but a large proportion of cows with digital dermatitis will.
So one more question for Nick, because your videos possibly raised the curiosity of many participants. So is she laming? Two questions are relating with this.
Can you repeat the questions for me? But I can't see that question. So is
the
she
question is from Farzaneh Sabohi. The question is easy. Is the cows laming?
Oh, right. So the fundamental question, in my opinion, yes, she is lame. Yes, but it comes back to what should we use the term lameness? So on our lameness score, she would be classified as a lame score. From a farmer perspective, the correlation with the term lameness seems to be with the severe end of the scoring spectrum. So I'd probably be careful about talking about is she lame in front of a farmer audience, because that could be highly contentious and cause a degree of upset. Of course, if I wanted to do that, then that would be the great way of doing it. So yes, she is lame, but be careful about using that term.
So you replied also to Sophie Matalia. Two people asked.
There is one question: how do you motivate a farmer to participate in lameness scoring without ROI from the dairy sector, increased milk price for low lameness herds?
Don't want to answer that one, or
well, Nico,
shall I answer it? Shall I answer it? I do a costing exercise, so I run through the figures that John was sort of alluding to earlier. You quickly see that the cost of lameness, while they're mostly hidden costs to the producer, just far outweigh the cost of investing in someone to do the scoring for you. And the scoring doesn't have to be, it's not a costly exercise in relation to the cost of the disease. And we invest that money in gathering that data for other diseases. So we just need to accept we're going to have to gather some data for lameness, and and that's the investment. And there's a good return on that investment if you get it right.
Okay.
Krista, I just had one comment, and sorry for interrupting, but what came across to me in both Nick's and John's presentation was the value of early detection.
Yes.
And to me, that came across very, very strongly, as opposed to many of the cases, including myself, when you go on farm, you'd see we're all good at when it's too late. So I guess the question for us in ICAR and also in IDF is how do we put our energies and focus into early detection within the working group, particularly. I'm asking the question of ourselves, Krista, but I think that's probably would be of great value to our farmers and our animals directly in early diagnosis. So I think rather than just coming up with scoring for clear cases, it's the early detection is, to me, sounds like it's more increasingly valuable, as John and Nick have pointed out.
Yeah, Martin, thank you. But I guess I think the other thing, just reading all the questions and having answered some of them, I guess what I would also like to highlight is the vital importance of prevention. A number of participants have been sort of implying that we don't think prevention is important, and of course that absolutely isn't the case. I guess it's more the nature of today's subject and presentations. It tends to focus us more on identification of lame animals and therefore treatment. Prevention is absolutely critical, and we now have lots of good quality data about how we intervene in the different systems. We could spend 2 days talking about that in its own right. So participants, please don't think that any of us think that prevention isn't critical, because it clearly is.
Thank you very much. Now we are, I think, one more question, one or two, and then I think we are going to close.
Krista, there is one here. Which score should we count and register as lame? 2, 3, 4, or 5, or all? Okay, so Anne-Marie, it's you. I'm not pretending to be a lameness expert. I would transfer. I think it should start from 3 to look at the feet when she's mildly lame, but I transfer maybe the answer to Nick or John. When the cow is starting to be lame, is it at the score 2, 3, 4, or 5, or all?
Go on, Nick, you go first.
Well, so we use a 4-point mobility score in the UK. So our lame score is 2 and a 3. So I don't have experience with using the Zimpro Sprecher score, but my interpretation is that it's the top 3 scores that you would classify as lame. But John, maybe you
I agree. Although then when you say that and when you start putting in an intervention point, that upsets some people, and I understand why, because of course if we're at in either scoring system at either the score 2 on Sprecher or the score 1 on the other scoring systems, we can identify abnormalities, and if we can identify abnormalities, it would suggest that there is something that we can do to intervene. And I think it depends largely on the audience and what we are trying to achieve. But for standard recording, I would agree with Nick.
Okay, so I think we are coming to the end. I hope the time passed by very quickly, and I think we could still spend some time for very interesting discussion. And I think we got some ideas also for probably further interesting sessions, like they are on prevention or early detection on related to lameness. I want to thank all of you for all the participants for participation. I want to thank all the speakers for their great and very interesting presentations. And I also want to thank all the people and experts and colleagues who are collaborating with us, and we're working together. And we would like also to invite you to cooperate with us on different topics And if you are interested, please send an email to Cesare. The other things, this is not an only action. Let's say we are working on this continuously, and with IDF on parent welfare. So we will have the next webinar on this topic about the animal welfare, the framework for recording indicators and meeting stakeholder needs. So there we will have presentations from OE, ISO, but also application in herd management from SEGES. So this will be on the 24th of February. In about a week, I guess we will distribute the detailed program. And then we will have a workshop on the 26th of April in conjunction with the ICA meeting. It's also virtual, but it will be a half day. And it will be there. There is then the invitation also to contributions from other projects and initiatives and best practices. And then we want also to work together with you how we can proceed on this way on harmonization of animal welfare parameters. This is then. It won't be free. It's a half day. It will be 50 euros. So if you register for ICA anyway, then it's included. But if you only participate there, it will be 50 euros. So I want to thank everyone. And in the northern or in Europe, I wish you a good evening. In New Zealand, John, you have morning or so that the day starting to have a good day. And yeah, looking forward in cooperating together on this really interesting topics and what we have seen really important topics for the farmers to get steps forward there. Not only for the farmers, but also for the animals, also for animal welfare and consumer acceptance. In this way, thank you very much, and looking forward that you participate in the next webinar. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.